systems nominal.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Mechwarriors. Today we are talking to a fellow YouTuber, Mr. Gaming J of the Gaming J YouTube channel, which you should definitely check out. He's got massive amounts of video, way more than me. He's been at this for a little bit longer. He's one of his major claims to fame is the 1,001 games list that he's been doing. He's been going through his backlog like a goddamn fiend. He is also a game developer, currently developing MetalMercs. The currently demo is out on Steam. I highly recommend checking it out. It's his answer to the classic BattleTech games of yore, the Crescent Hawks Inception, and especially Crescent Hawks Revenge. Gaming Jay, welcome to the channel, sir.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey, well, thanks for making a game I actually enjoy playing, so that helps. I mean, usually if I have somebody on this show, it's because they're doing something I like. So, congrats on that. And I wasn't kidding about the amount of videos you've got. I'm looking at your channel right here. Over 1.4K videos. You have been busy.
Yeah. And a lot of that sort of goes back because, as you say, when I started my YouTube channel, what we were doing is trying to go through the book 1,001 Video Games Just Play Before You Die. And that's still a work in progress. When I started, my plan was to avoid burnout and try and do about 100 games a year. So it's about 2 a week. And been doing that for about 9 years. So
yeah, I'm looking at the playlists, list of playlists. 1,001 video games you must play before you die. Year 9 is the one you're currently at. And if I'm not mistaken, the video you are currently on that one, video 896 with the darkness on PS3. So yeah, you have run the gamut on this thing. I'm looking at just this year, like I said, the darkness on PS3, Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Vegas 2, Dodon Patchy, Eternal Darkness, EVE Online, Rogue on DOS. Classic, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the original. There's a reason they call them roguelikes, people. It's because of that game. Valkyria Chronicles, I mean, Baldur's Gate 2, Metal Gear Solid 3. I mean, yeah, this is one of those things. How do you really get through the kind of like this? Because I'm assuming that there's certain game genres that you prefer over other ones. How do you get yourself into that mindset where you can just play absolutely anything on this kind of a frequency?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I will say, it's in a weird way been tougher than I thought. Just to try all these games, because when I set out, I always loved retro games growing up, like the Nintendo, the original NES, like DOS games. I grew up on those. So when I thought, I'll play through this book, I was leafing through the 80s and the 90s. I'm like, oh, there's so many good games in here, and so I was looking forward to it. And then the longer it goes, the more I realize it's there's a lot of games in there from the more modern systems that I didn't grow up with and I didn't have the same nostalgic joy for and stuff. So some of the PS3 games, I owned a PS3, I played a PS3. There's tons of good games on there, but as you say, not every game is for everyone. So for instance, I'm not as huge into racing games as some people, but there's a lot of racing games in there that I've had to try. And I think to answer your question of getting through it is to build up a handful of videos when I feel motivated. So that in times when I don't feel motivated, I can just sort of release those and take a break. So having breaks is really important. I've learned over this quest for anything, right? You'll burn out of anything if you do it too much. So,
yeah, I know that feeling.
But then the other thing that I think I've sort of discovered in being forced to try all these games is that there are some elements in games that I never would have normally tried where I'm like, oh, that's really neat, or oh, I actually really like that. Or sometimes I get surprised, I say, well, I'm not really into racing games, and I'll play one that I really like and think, oh, actually, I legit like this and would have played it again. So you do discover more doing this, but it has been a long process.
Yeah. For a long time, I was one of those snooty guys who looked down on the, modern military shooters and stuff like that came out during that period, your CODs and stuff like that. I recently went back a while back and, was playing some of the, not the World War II ones or, modern warfare, but the future ones, advanced warfare and infinite warfare and, those ones. COD Blops 2 and 3, those kinds of things, or and I'm just like, hold on, this is fun. I
Yeah.
mean, like especially Infinite Warfare, where you're just like, jumping into, I mentioned this in a previous video back in the day, but where you're just jumping into a spaceship, flying off, attacking, going into a dogfight, then jumping out into space, floating onto an enemy ship, boarding it, shooting everything up, doing an objective, getting back out, and doing it all over again. So it's like, why aren't more games doing this kind of thing? This would be great. Like,
Yeah.
why
I
isn't
mean,
someone doing a BattleTech game where you're doing that kind of stuff? There's an entire there's the entire, aerospace fighters and
yeah.
stuff like that in those games. I mean, what the hell?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a reason these games are so popular, right? Like even if after playing it, you're like, wow, that's a lot of fun. I may not become a regular player of this, but I like see why so many people are playing it.
Yeah, you see
Um,
the appeal.
but yeah, I mean, BattleTech is, in my mind, so underserved. It's so rich in like potential storytelling and games, and like there has been a bit of a renaissance,
Mhm.
more modern games that have come out, which is awesome. But yeah, growing up, I always wished there were more BattleTech games than there were.
Yeah. And here's the thing, when you have a setting like that, or like Heavy Gear or the other Dream Pod 9 games that I've covered and stuff like that, generally speaking, there's room for any kind of genre. I mean, there's probably death races on Solaris. That's all I'm saying. It's the kind of thing where you expect that kind of stuff. And you're gonna have like the opportunities for, fuck it. If you want to do a clanner dating sim, there's probably room for that too. I wouldn't play it, but hey, the more the merrier, right? And there's probably somebody
Yeah,
who wants that.
I mean, it's a rich universe, right?
Mhm.
And I don't know if you read the novels. There were like novels in the
Some
90s.
of them, yeah.
Yeah, I read a bunch of those, and yeah, like the mech combat and stuff was cool, but then the novels had all this element of like politics and stuff, which
Mhm.
obviously is big in the universe, but a lot of the games don't really focus on any of that. But I mean, like you could have imagined there could have been, right? You could have had a big. I think there was a Succession Wars board game that was more like Risk,
Mhm.
and you could like conquer territories, and there was some politics and stuff negotiating between players. Um, but you could imagine a PC game could have come out for that.
Yeah.
People probably
Even
would
for
have.
the tabletop, there's room for that kind of stuff. There's a couple of games that actually act as kind of like 4X overlay for any kind of war game you want to play. There's one called Victory by Any Means I'm familiar with. That's basically, it's like system agnostic. It's like a 4X kind of thing that you put over the actual tactical game that you want to play for the actual battles.
I think.
So that's a kind of interesting concept to it. But yeah, I mean, why isn't there a Battletech 4X game?
Yeah,
Imagine that.
yeah,
Imagine Crusader Kings in space with mechs.
yeah. No,
I mean,
I think it could totally work.
uh-huh.
It's as I say, I think it's a rich universe with lots of elements to it, and it's always tapped for like the MechWarrior series, obviously, like the first person you want to pilot the mechs. That's the
Yeah,
big
that was
one.
my entry into the whole genre.
But then you have a few entries like Mech Commander, Crescent Hawks, where it's more tactical. But like you could do so much with the universe.
Hmm. Yeah,
More than
I'm still wondering whether when they're going to do an actual like Mass Effect RPG kind of thing. They're
Mm.
kind of, I think, eyeing that a bit with the MechWarrior 5 clans coming up, since they're really going in for characterization and NPCs and stuff like that. We'll see how well that goes. I mean, I enjoy MechWarrior 5, but I have my serious criticisms of it in the sense that it just does not live up to its predecessor. We'll see if Clans does, but I have you played any of the? I know you've played a whole bunch of the original MechWarrior. Actually, you did for your channel. That's a blast from the
Yeah,
past right there. Which is actually, I think, what they were aiming for when they did MechWarrior 5. It was a throwback to that style of game where it's the huge sandbox, and you go anywhere, and negotiate things like that. It is very much almost a remake of MechWarrior 1 in that regard.
that's cool. No, I haven't played MechWarrior 5. Um, I actually haven't kept up with too many of the modern BattleTech games. The one big exception, though, was the Harebrained Studios when they were reviving
Yeah.
BattleTech. There's a Kickstarter on that when it
Hmm.
released. I've told this story on my own channel, but when it released, it's like I made sure I had nothing to do for a few days, and I started playing it as soon as I got it downloaded, And it got really, really late at night, and I kept saying, "Oh, I'll do one more mission."
That's how
And
you
then
know it's a
before you
good
know it,
game.
it's like the sun's rising, and I was like, you know what? I don't have anything to do today. I'm just going to keep going. And I played that game for about 36 hours straight,
My
which I
man.
haven't done anything that crazy since I was like a kid. And it was like one of my, happiest recent sort of gaming experiences because I'm like, man, that was like
Nice.
so fun when it came out. Um,
It still
but no,
is.
I'm sorry.
It still is. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
playing it recently, it's it still holds up to this day. They did a good job on that one.
Oh, I agree. It's very replayable, and I know there's lots of mods,
Oh,
like
yeah.
rope tech and stuff, which I haven't gotten into. I know it exists. I've seen it. It's just, finding the time to play some of these games is hard to do these days,
Yeah.
which is why I haven't really kept up with the newer Mechwarriors. I do want to play them, and I think they even have like MechWarrior 5 on like a wish list or something.
Mhm.
And I watch, when it goes on sale, I kind of think, is now the time? But it's just, sometimes you're so busy that you postpone it. And
That can be a problem with a lot of modern games. They tend to go for, big in terms of like, yeah, play for 100 hours, massive open world. And it's like, dude, I don't have time for that. I don't
yeah,
have time to finish the other 100-hour open world games I've already got. It's
yeah.
just like, give me a minute.
I figure one day I'll retire and then I'll be able to go back and play the 20-year-old games. I seem to always be playing games that are 20 years old. So it's
Mm.
like the retro games for my 1001 Quest. When I retire, I'll play all the games I missed from this era because I was so busy.
I mean,
Um,
hell, I still play MechWarrior 4 Mercenaries.
no.
So I still consider it the benchmark by which I judge the rest of that series
Mhm.
completely. Because it does pretty much everything I want out of that game, out of that series right there. It's got the characterization, it's got, the world, it's got the mechs, it's got, the feel of controls. MechWarrior 3 has, a bit more in terms of like, interesting way of it really feels more simmy still at that point. MechWarrior 4 is just a little bit more arcadey than the MechWarrior 3 was. And MechWarrior 3 has all the terrain deformation, which is always cool, but definitely MechWarrior 4 Mercenaries is the one I judge everything else in that series to in comparison to. And I actually think MechWarrior 2 actually Mercenaries actually does live up very close to that one too in its own way, which
Oh,
is
really?
interesting. Yeah. It's got its
Yeah.
it's got its own thing going for it. Something that's actually in common with your game, which we'll get into with the branching campaigns and stuff like that. That one's got
Mhm.
that too. It's got definitely you got a lot going for it that can be mined for future games in this series, which is something I wish that they had done with MechWarrior 5, but that one, it's got good gameplay, but the things that surrounding the gameplay, like the missions and the story and stuff like that, is just wide as an ocean, deep as a puddle. It's always been my issue with that.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a shame sometimes if they've got like, good fundamentals in gameplay, but then like the support systems to make it, really compelling aren't quite there.
Yeah. Which the Hairbrained Screens Battletech game did have. It had, interactions between crew members and stuff like that. It had, events as you're traveling, upgrading your ship, your base and stuff like that. It had, the extra bits of interactivity and of character. It had more
Yeah.
character. Also, let's face it, I didn't enjoy any of the NPCs in MechWarrior 5 compared to, Spectre and Castle and in MechWarrior 4. I mean, there's one of those reasons why I always hire Goblin as one of my lance mates in MechWarrior 4 Mercenaries, because he's literally doing a Peter Lorre impression the entire time, and it's awesome.
Yeah, you gotta have those just sort of fun bits in there, I
You
think.
got to have characters,
Yeah.
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 Yeah. But anyway, enough about other people's games. You are making your own goddamn game, starting out as a kind of fan remake, or MetalMercs, as it was known at the time. I think I
Hmm.
still got a version 2.00 something in one of my folders, back from when that was available.
Yeah.
So, what talk us through this? What guy brought you on to creating your own, starting out as a fan game of these original games, like the original Crescent Hawk Battletech games?
Yeah, so it's actually been quite a journey. So I have the Crescent Hawks Inception was the first BattleTech game I ever played. I didn't know about it really. I was like a little kid, didn't know about it in tabletop, anything. My uncle had like a disc, like on his desk. It said Crescent Hawks Inception. I tried it, And I always loved RPGs and stuff, but so many were fantasy themed, which is
Mhm.
great. I mean, I do love the fantasy genre as well, but so few were science fiction themed that when I got my hands on that game, I was addicted. I was hooked. I
Yeah.
copied his disc. It was like a 5 1/4 inch black floppy disk. I copied that, took it home, played it forever. And it wasn't until years later that I discovered there was a sequel. And so I was on vacation with some family a few years later. I was still pretty little, and I walked into a computer store and they had the BattleTech Power Hits that had Crescent Hawks Inception, Revenge, and MechWarrior 1. And I didn't know Revenge existed. I didn't know MechWarrior 1 existed, although it would make sense because I knew
Yeah.
about MechWarrior 2. Anyway, I got those, played the hell out of all of them, and to this day, they're probably still like some of my favorite games. I know some of their gameplay elements don't hold up as well these days to newcomers, but just like the amount of time that I spent with them and how awesome they were at the time really stuck with me. So ever since then, I've always kind of wished there was more Crescent Hawks. And in high school, I was starting to get into programming, and I tried to make a sequel to the Crescent Hawks Revenge. And I tried to kind of blend the open world elements of MechWarrior 1, where you could travel the inner sphere and get contracts, with the Crescent Hawks Revenge. And that I found years later. I put on my YouTube channel. I think you can find it. The video might be called like the unreleased sequel to the Crescent Hawks Revenge or something. And I was showing it to people, and it was that video and the response from it that really got me seriously thinking about, I should try this again. I have like 20 plus years experience since I started in high school and sort of muddled my way through trying to make that. And so I think it was during the pandemic. I had time one summer,
There you
and I
go.
was like, I'm just gonna spend a few weeks and like prototype up, just see if I could get the mechs moving again, use the Crescent Hawks graphics. And, one thing led to another, and I had a working prototype turn into a demo, which I started to share, and people started to really like. And um, from there, the game eventually. So that's where MetalMercs came from, and I probably worked on that for about 2 years, I think, when all said and done. And we added all sorts of really cool elements. Any BattleTech fan would probably have a lot of fun with it. Um, but always in the back of my mind was this idea that it sure would be great to like actually keep building this thing and have it be a real game that I could like put on Steam and that I could do whatever I want with.
Yeah,
And
without having the lawyers coming down your ass.
exactly. I mean, the thing with fan projects is they're they're amazing until they get shut down, right?
Yeah.
And so I worked on this thing for like 2 years, and I thought, boy, if it got shut down, that would really suck. And there was even a point where it started to get some attention, and the Discord started to be flooded by like new people who were coming in, which was great. But then I worried, uh-oh, this might be too much attention. Like we might be just dipping too high over the radar, and now
Yeah.
we're going to be
I
noticed.
think I remember when Sarna.net started covering your project, and it's like, yeah, that's gonna get somebody's attention.
Yeah. So as much as people loved it, I kind of realized if this is going to survive, I think it has to be its own thing. And so I spent a couple more months putting as many finishing touches on the BattleTech version as I could to leave it in as playable and as good a state as I could before I decided, okay, we're going to shift now, and I'm going to kind of, redo all the assets, redo the universe, redo everything. And I essentially kind of went silent for about 6 months while I worked behind the scenes to like figure everything out. Because like you got to figure like, who are the factions? What are their histories? What kind of
Yeah.
mechs do you have? What kind of weapons? And MetalMercs, definitely anyone who plays it, if you're a BattleTech fan, it'll feel like it has BattleTech's DNA. Like
Oh yeah.
it's definitely feels BattleTech-y.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a spherical region of space where the capital and the dead center and different factions, great, shall we say, houses, if you will, that radiate out into the fringes, as they're referred to, from the core, and they hate each other. And
Yep.
they're fighting each other with mercenaries using giant robots.
Yes. Again, like very battle techy.
Yeah.
But there are some. So one thing that I was also really reluctant to move on from BattleTech because I love BattleTech. Like I didn't want to not make a BattleTech game initially. But one thing I discovered when I finally bit the bullet and started to do it was that there's a lot of freedom in not having to follow BattleTech's lore and BattleTech's rules, right? So if
Yeah.
I want a weapon that does thing X, that might not exist in BattleTech, but it doesn't matter because if it's fun, I can put it in the game. Um, so the mechs in MetalMercs are a little different. The factions, the houses, their mechs operate. They have some more distinct differences between them. Not night and day, but like one faction has better cooling, one faction has faster mechs, one faction has heavier mechs that can use smoke screens to obscure their advance. So there's a little variety in there. But the other thing I think that's really interesting is like I'm a lore guy. I love lore. I love like digging into like, okay, these two houses hate each other, but why, and like what's going to happen to them in the future. So MetalMercs right now is almost at like version 0, where like not much has happened in the universe yet. And the demo that you can play on Steam right now, it has that very familiar, sort of core setting that kind of feels like the Inner Sphere a little bit. But what I think is exciting is that the game is going to continue to expand and go places that BattleTech hasn't gone. And so where it's starting is familiar to anyone who's played BattleTech, but some of the plans I have for like what's going to unfold in the universe, and we have this thing called the Great Expedition, which is where all the houses embark on a journey outside the core. And there's like an inciting incident for why they do that. That's going to be the main gameplay mode of like the final version when it comes out, as opposed to just bumbling around in the core. And there's going to be things out there that are interesting and different, and you're not just going to find like the clans out there, right? Like it's going to diverge quite a bit. And so familiar to BattleTech fans, but it's going to be different in fun ways, I think, or I hope.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that I think is very important when, like, even if you're just starting from a similar basis, or at least, the similar kind of inspirations, like every so often, there's always somebody who says that BattleTech would be better if it had aliens in it because they're sick and tired. Oh, I'm tired of all the humans. I just want to bring some aliens and stuff like that. So, like, sorry, that's not BattleTech anymore at that point. This is not what the setting's about. You want something different. Well, you're providing something different. I mean, who knows what else is, as you say, what else is out there? For all we know, the core is now in the middle of a cosmic horror story, and there's all sorts of nasty gribblies out there coming to get them, or that who knows what else could be out there. But provided it's something that can be fought with giant robots, I mean, all good.
Yeah, and I mean that's sort of in all my exploration of like thinking about the lore and the histories and like where they're going. In the back of my head, I'm like, but they always have to fight it with giant robots. Like whatever the next sort of section of space they encounter, why they're going there, whatever, the robots have to be at the center. So they will be. But,
There you go.
Yeah.
Plus, the added bonus also, you have that initial, familiar core that can attract people who are already fans of, say, BattleTech or, other mech franchises like that, get them interested. And then you can have them go off in that completely other direction. And they're willing to follow you because you've already got, the touch tones that they were interested in to begin with.
Yeah. And one other thing I will say, too, that I always loved about BattleTech that I think sort of, my game will intentionally try to include is eras, like having the 3025 era and the 3050 era and stuff. And so, like right now, the demo is mainly focused around hanging around the core, taking contracts. There's this sort of uneasy peace, but the houses are still fighting each other, like especially as they get away from the core, because in my universe, there's actually still basically like a Star Lord. It's the Star Regents. There's a reason for that, but anyway, the houses. It's a little more like Game of Thrones, where like there is a king, and the houses are supposed to be at peace, but they don't always stay that way. And the farther away from the capital you get, the more they can get away with fighting each other.
Which is why the mission difficulty gets much higher the closer you are to the fringe.
Yes, the farther out you go. But I think one thing that I'm hoping to include is that whatever style of universe you like, you can play the game in different eras. So, like, if you really like kind of the classic, I hang around the core, I take contracts and stuff, you can play in like the era before the Great Expedition, where it's like mostly all happening there. If you really like, you want to go into like the fringe and see what's out there, and there's different gameplay elements that will emerge out there. It's like you could play in that era, and there will be like other eras that you can choose. Because again, in BattleTech, like for me, I really love the 3025 era myself personally, but I like dipping my toes in other eras. It was fun to see how the universe changed and evolved and like different weapon systems. And sometimes the weapons started to get too complex for me, and I thought, I'll go back to the simpler times. But I always loved the idea that you could play this game in different time periods, and it's like different things were happening, not just in the politics, but the technology. And I always thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same like in BattleTech. You have at some point the Helm memory core gets found, and a whole bunch of lost tech gets reintroduced. You have the Federate Commonwealth merger, and then the Forced Succession War happening, and the map gets completely redrawn. All of a sudden, the Lyrans and the Fed Sons, all of a sudden, it's just one big thing, and it's just like, holy crap! Okay, I hope I still have a good reputation with these people, because otherwise, my Merc contracts are drying up, and I'm gonna have to start working for the Draconis Combine. Oh no, I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to work for the Capellans.
Oh no.
Or just, stick with Merrick. Because then you're never gonna run out of contracts, because the worst enemies were Merrick's worst enemy is a Merrick. But glory to Merrick.
Right. Hey,
Space Balkans, you gotta love it.
keeps the mercs happy, right?
Exactly. I mean, that is something I like about your current setup as it is. You do have you have that difference where it's not a full succession war kind of thing, because there is still a strong central government. Well, there is a central government, but
Yes.
if there's enough room for a kind of Cold War to be constantly happening, where you have brush fires, and hotspots where the various houses are fighting against pirates and bandits on these various planets, but also against each other, sending out skirmishing parties and stuff like that from their hired mercs, who are of course completely deniable. So
Yeah.
probably some of those bandits and pirates that you're fighting are just other merc companies that someone else is hired, some other house is hired, setting on a false flag to attack, one of your current employers.
Yeah, exactly. It's much easier to deny you're actually fighting with your neighbor if you're sending mercenaries in than if you're sending your own house units. So
Yeah. And I did like already that you have the differentiation. Like in the actual demo, if I'm not mistaken, you have, let's see, there are only two factions in the current demo
yeah,
versus the version on Patreon.
there's the Confederate Vanguard Union. They're like the sort of militaristic faction. Their mechs are sort of straightforward. They don't have anything too fancy going on, but they're just slightly more efficient with things like heat. And they're very good at logistics. So if you get contracts with them, it's usually not a problem to deploy your forces. The other faction in the demo is the Helios Sovereignty. They're like the rich a-holes of the universe. They
Yeah.
For them, just because you have their contract, they're not going to help you with deployments. You got to pay your own way to actually deploy. So it's sort of like,
Which does have
that,
which does have the advantage though. If you want to go heavy, you can go heavy. You're gonna pay
yeah.
for it, but there's no limitations in terms of weight or number of mechs that you can bring with you. You can bring whatever the hell you want, so long as you're willing to foot the bill. So there's an advantage to working for them in that regard.
And if you want to cheap out, if you feel like on a particular mission, you could take a smaller force, you can save a bit of cash. So they will pay you well, but it's a little more on your end to calculate what you want to bring on the battlefield.
Yeah, what you can afford to bring, what you can afford to lose.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of the battlefield itself, one thing I definitely liked about your particular approach to this, you have the just like for example, salvaging the different components and stuff like that. When you're doing repairs, it's all individual parts that you can then depending on the amount of salvage rights that you have access to, then just okay, I need armor plates to repair this mech. I need internal components to fix up the internals here. Here's an extra fusion core I can use to restart this mech that got completely destroyed and stuff like that. So I do like the degree of technicality, I guess is the word I'm looking for. No, not necessarily. just the fiddliness. I enjoy the fiddliness when it comes to mech games like this, and that's something I appreciate quite a bit when you're looking at that. It reminded me in a weird way when I was playing the original Heavy Gear from 1997, where you could go into the mechlab and start adjusting things, manually installing new hydraulics and stuff like that into individual parts. I mean, you're probably not going to want to go that in depth in terms of like that, although you do have a pretty good mechlab, so to speak. But that's the kind of feeling it gave me. It's like, okay, one thing that would actually be kind of cool is if you could pre-buy a bunch of that stuff at the shop and just carry around some spare parts with you, so that you can fix your mechs up on the field.
That's actually a good idea. There are some elements that are going to be added. So right now the game is in a demo state. Over the next year, the plan is to add in some of the remaining gameplay modes and some elements before its final release next year. So there is some stuff I've thought about that's along the lines of what you're talking about. I don't want to reveal too much, but but that's not a bad idea. Yeah, and I will say the salvage is something that's interesting. It's been on a little journey since the game started as MetalMercs, and there's probably a few more tweaks to come to make it even better. But there was a time where missions were only a single mission. I think you mentioned briefly earlier that missions are kind of like extended campaigns. You have multiple missions in a row.
Yeah, and some of them that you have access to only if you fail a previous mission. So there's branches.
Yes, there's a branching path where so most missions, if you fail, you lose the whole contract. But some have, if you fail, then you'll go this route instead. So gives you a little breathing room. But yeah, back when we had every single contract was just one mission, salvage was just not nearly as fun. And it was like, well, why would I waste a salvage token repairing the armor on a mech when I can just repair the mech in I'm going to be in the starport in 2 seconds.
Exactly, yeah.
Repair it. And so I think when we started to have extended campaigns, which I believe was like the suggestion of some people on Discord, they were like, oh, have you thought of this? And I was like, that is a good idea. But it totally changed something that was useless into something that is crucial. Between missions, if you don't see enough armor plates to repair all your mechs, you have to think, oh God, which one am I going to actually repair? Because they all need it. Who's essential?
Yeah. It's something that MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries did very well in that, because that one also had those branching, along each campaign you went on was that kind of branching stuff. And it didn't matter how much money you had. If your mech, you didn't have the extra weapons to repair, to swap out for the ones destroyed, you had to go without. Simple, flat out, nothing you could do about it. So it's that's definitely something. Well, another thing I would love to be able to do is just scrap a destroyed mech, one of your own destroyed mechs. It's okay, this thing's fucked. Okay, let's just tear it apart for salvage. Okay, that gives you a bunch of extra plates and internal components depending on how badly your mech got obliterated. That would actually come in handy. Of course, then you can't repair your mech afterwards, but if you're in the middle of a long-term contract and you're completely screwed, that might be your only option.
Yeah. Okay, I will say, because you perfectly predicted, something like that is in the works for a little update.
Nice.
The idea of being able to scrap a mech and then you lose the ability to salvage it, but not necessarily your own mech, but
I mean, obviously, if you have other enemy mechs on the field that you can take apart for parts, that's always a good thing to do first instead of your own.
Yeah, but no, I love. For me, when I play these kinds of games, I love being posed with choices. Do I want to destroy this thing and take its pieces, or is it worth me salvaging this thing? Or, again, who should I repair and what's the priority? So, I feel like that makes it really fun for people.
Yeah, I do like the fact that I can pause the game. The game is basically a real-time tactics game in the sense of the Crescent Hawk's Revenge, and rather than the turn-based kind of thing that was the Crescent Hawk's Inception. I do like the fact that I can just hit the pause button and, okay, everybody stop firing at that thing. It's already dead. Do not wreck it more than you have to, because there are degrees of destroyed for the mechs that you encounter. So I usually end up having, okay, this whole blob of my guys, 2 whole columns, 8 mechs just obliterating a single target. And I'm like, oh shit, this thing's almost dead. Okay, redirect. Just leave one of them on there. Otherwise I'm going to lose all the salvage.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the mechanic of mechs sort of being over damaged, where they hit a point where okay, now they're destroyed. So if you keep hitting them, you eventually lose all the salvage.
Yeah.
That was an intentional attempt to sort of brainstorm how can we stop total death balling in like a somewhat interesting way, because I mean, I'm the same with a lot of these RTS games. You gather all your units in one group and you click on one guy, and that guy is going to be dead in 2 seconds. And it's effective and it's fun, but um, the idea of like, can you get more strategic in your engagements and stuff? And there's some value in spreading guys out. Could we sort of nudge players towards that?
Yeah.
You can death ball if you want. You'll just get less salvage typically.
Yeah, and depending on the missions you get, you're gonna want that salvage. Like every time I try, like even a 1-star assassinate the head of this garrison, I get wrecked every single goddamn time. Because yeah, I just have to take out these 1 to 3 guys, and the 12 or so other mechs that come down on my ass at the same time. Which I'm not saying those missions are terrible. I'm just saying I hate them.
Yeah. Well, that's where a quick strike force may be more effective than like a big brute force. But I will also say another big element of what I'm working on this next year is improving the quality and the balance of the missions. Because, I think as fun as the game is right now, I see areas where it can be improved over the next year. And like one thing I always loved about for instance, Mech Commander, is that it actually had, missions where you had to like go here, do this, do that, and like there was sort of stages to your missions. And so far in MetalMercs, we haven't done too much of that. The missions are pretty straightforward, like kill these guys, protect this building, kill this building. I think another way that, for instance, we can get people making more tactical decisions on the battlefield and not just death balling and stuff is by having a little more going on in the missions and, just a few more goals for them to accomplish. And so I think for things like the assassinate, I like the idea of like running in and assassinating the commanders. I think right now the missions are a little tough and they are a little heavy-handed when they all swarm you.
Yeah, I think the main issue there is that once one of them detects you, they're all coming on your ass pretty much.
Yes.
So there's no
all corners of the map.
Yeah, exactly. You can't like really, take these guys out before they can alert the other ones. Or, that would be an interesting kind of idea. You have like radar towers and stuff like that in the intercept missions where your goal is to prevent enemies who are trying to leave the battlefield from reaching their escape points. Having something like that where okay, there are alarm posts here. We need to get to this point, take out this guy, and get out. Having something where like okay, we need to skirt this particular area, avoid sensors and stuff like that. Having smaller mechs with camouflage systems and things like that, ECM things would actually come in handy for those kinds of missions. And for general missions too, if you wanted to, like if you're having a destroy an ammo dump or something like that, and you want to avoid most of the other mechs that are approaching, having some mechs with strong sensors and even stronger camouflage systems would come in really handy. You just go in, sneak around, take it out, get the hell out.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think one thing that missions like that would do as well is right now there's not too much incentive to always bring your heaviest, beefiest mechs into battle because, you want to kill everything you encounter. But having missions where it may be more about speed or maneuverability and stuff would give those lighter mechs more value and allow you to sort of have a place for them in your missions.
Yeah, because that's always been the problem with Mechwarrior games for the most part. By the end of the game, you're pretty much always bringing the assault lances, no matter what, because that's basically what can survive. Because for most of those games, I think the main problem with them is that in terms of difficulty, the main thing they can do is just throw heavier and heavier waves of, enemies at you versus something where it's more tactical, where you simply have, more smarter enemies. You have like maybe like one command lance of mechs, maybe with some, auxiliaries, but they're playing it smart. They're, flanking you and taking you out from the sides and stuff like that, or using small mechs to harass you and stuff like that. So where very much the quality of the pilots is the thing that increases the difficulty versus just having like stuck with one lance, one column of mechs versus an entire army, as is often the case in some of these games.
Yep. Yeah, I think finding creative ways to enhance the difficulty and not always just make it heavier mechs is there's really something to that. Something else that we've talked about on the Discord, and which is sort of planned for like making missions sort of more interesting, is having optional objectives as a way to dynamically scale difficulty and let the players choose. So, I mean, this isn't anything new. Lots of games do this.
Oh yeah.
I actually sort of started thinking about this when I was playing Mario Wonder recently. In Mario, you have to collect the extra, special coins, but you don't have to. But
everybody tries
really hard. Yeah, some levels get really hard when you try and get them all. And so, the idea of in a mission, it's like, here's your core mission, do this and you're fine. Here's 3 optional objectives. If you do this, you get bonuses. It's like players can then choose to, engage in as many as they think they can handle or abandon them if it gets too hard.
Yeah.
And I think that can make it more fun as well.
Yeah. Plus it's, if you ever played TIE Fighter, Star Wars TIE Fighter?
Not too much. I've tried it, but I haven't done too much of it.
That one has this cool thing where you have your main flight officer who's giving you your missions, and then you have this guy in the corner dressed in a cloak who's, like, hey, while you're out there, here's some other objectives you can do. And it's like, not only like you're doing the objectives, you're supposed to be doing, but some of those other bonus objectives kind of subvert what you're actually doing. And it's like, yeah, or it's kind of like, okay, you're doing your mission for, like say the Omnisphere Imperium or something like that.
Yep.
And here comes this guy from the Orion Corporate who's, just, sneaking around the bar there. Once you take the mission, you go to the bar. It's like, talk to the local. There's that option to talk to the locals and, get some gossip. It's like a guy from the opposite team comes to you and is like, yeah, while you're out there, how say you do this objective? We'll pay you double what your current employer is paying you, but it'll fuck up your reputation with this other guy a bit because you're doing something that you're a mercenary. You work for the highest bidder. I mean, really, play up that kind of scummy soldier of fortune kind of thing, which is kind of fun.
I really like that idea, and I may jot that down after our interview today. So that's
my work here is done.
Yeah.
Not that I won't want to give you too much work. You've already got a whole bunch of work already done, and you're looking at, as you said, going into next year. When you were creating this game, right now the maps themselves are procedurally generated, I assume. There's nothing pre-generated for the most part.
The maps actually right now are not procedurally generated. The current maps in the game were just drawn out. But there are procedurally generated maps coming in. I have a system that generates the maps. It's just not quite ready for prime time yet. Okay. But that's the direction it will go.
I gotta say, I honestly did not realize that you must have done a whole bunch of maps because I didn't realize that they were necessarily already pre-made like that.
Yeah, there are a bunch. They evolved over time. So you start with a small pool, and as I say, I mean, this game was MetalMercs for about 2 years, and it's been about 2 years as MetalMercs. It's about 4 years, somewhere in there, 3-4 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of maps right now.
Yeah, and you've already got things like terrain effects. You've got water jumping in a lake or a river will cool down your mech because you still have the heat mechanic and such. But also, like the temperature on gravity on the plants having an impact and stuff like that. So you've already done a shit ton of work on this thing. And honestly, the pixel art looks really, really good.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, everything's clearly, you can see what everything is looking at it, which is more than I can say for some other games I've played.
I think that's one of the, it's pixel art basically because it started as emulating Crescent Hawks and also because I'm not a great artist, so it's the best I can do. But I agree where I think pixel art has a soft spot in my own heart. And I think things just can look really nice as pixel art and they can be easy to read, as you say.
Yeah. Plus you got the ability to zoom in and out too, which is always useful.
Yeah. So if you're not sure what that little speck is, you can zoom right on in and see it up close.
Yeah, and there's always an option so that the tags and names on the various mechs are always there or only there when you're zoomed out. So you have a lot of options in that regard too. You
Hmm.
also have a lot of options when it comes to creating your main characters too. You had created a character creation system that and actually very has a lot of options to it in terms of like capabilities and stats and different things that not only affect combat but also the negotiation and overworld kind of situation as well.
Yeah, that was actually a fun update to do that. I hadn't told any of the people on Discord or anything that that was going to be a feature that was coming up, but we at one point pilots had no skills. They were just, this is how good they are at shooting, this is how good they are at piloting. Do you want them? And then we did an update where I added in, specialties. So like this guy's really good with missiles, this guy's really good with lasers, this guy's really good with cannons. And then it made choices with pilots more interesting, where it's like, well, this guy technically has a higher gunnery skill, but this other guy has better specialties. So it's like you didn't always necessarily just go with the most skilled.
Mhm.
And then there were some skills that I had come up with that I thought were too powerful, and I kind of set them aside. And then at one point, I was like, well, why doesn't the main character have them? And so I added in some of those skills. I spent a couple weeks brainstorming even more. So, yeah, I think there's something like 20 different unique commander specialties, and it's like everything from like easier negotiations to cheaper mechs to like um, there's one that I always thought was funny called Infamous, where when you're on the battlefield, enemies are more likely to target you, but they have a harder time hitting you. So it's like you kind of become like you're out there and they all want to get you. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, which is useful. I mean, when it comes to like, being on the battlefield like that, how do you figure out how to code for the AI for these things? Not because not you're not just dealing with the AI for the enemies, but also for, your actual characters who you could like micromanage each and every one of them and to do that. But even then, once you hit the unpause and they're performing their orders, well, they're on their own from that point until you redirect them. So how difficult is it for a game like this to get these things working properly?
Yeah, I would say simple AI is easy. Good AI is very hard. And we're somewhere closer to the easy side right now. And the hope is to see that evolve over time. Um, So when the game was MetalMercs, the AI I had was like dead simple, where the enemies would just see each other and just run towards each other and just until one of them died. Um, in MetalMercs, we've now gotten a little more sophisticated, where units will first of all, do a better job of judging distance. So they'll kind of look at their weapons, and you have a little say in this. You can tell them if you want them to go up close, stay mid range, or long range. Long range, they'll hang back to the range of their farthest shooting weapon. Mid range, they'll kind of get in there a little bit, but still not too close. And up close, they just go right for it. Um, so there's a bit of complexity in them making decisions about where to try to move. But then, of course, you have to write in code to figure out like where to actually move in 2 dimensions, which
Yeah.
be a little tricky. Um,
Yeah, because you have to keep in mind they're usually not just one-on-one. You have the other allied, characters who you're trying not to get in their way, but you're also trying not to get too close to the enemies that are also there who are going to take pot shots at you while you're busy with another enemy.
exactly. And that's why I say so we're sort of somewhere between like easy and one day good, is that like they do a good job at keeping their distance, but sometimes the enemies can get in and they have a harder time backing off. Um, But the AI also does a handful of other things where it pays attention to its overall heat levels. And heat works a little differently in MetalMercs than BattleTech, but it's still a factor. And when units get too hot, they do want to back off. So depending on a pilot's level of skill, depending on like their piloting skill, they will have different thresholds of like when they decide to back off. And units will actually back off a bit if they're starting to overheat, or they'll try to at least.
Yeah,
Um,
including
and they,
enemies if I've seen from all the scorchers I've hit them with.
yeah. And they do a handful of other things too. Like they kind of look at how much armor they have, how many internal hit points they have, and that also affects like how loose they are with their shooting. One of the heat consequences in MetalMercs is that if your unit starts to overheat, it starts to like melt from the inside. Kind of like the Harebrained Studios BattleTech, where you take internal damage. That's a little different than how BattleTech does it. But basically, units, if they have a lot of internal points left, they will be pretty loose with their firing, and they don't mind racking that heat up. As their internal hit points go down, they start to get a little more conservative.
Yeah.
And then as their armor drops really low and they start to feel overwhelmed, they'll just like go crazy, like panicking, trying to like get guys off of. So there's a little sophistication in what's going on in their little brains. But it's still, I think it's good enough to have like some fun skirmishes with the computer, but I could definitely see, and I hope to see that part of the game evolve. And so, it'd be really neat to see like different personalities on the battlefield.
I was gonna say, yeah.
Some certain kinds of enemies that behave in slightly different ways that are obvious.
Yeah, or like you have this character, you start looking for a new mercs to hire for your team. You find this guy, oh yeah, he's great skills. He's a legend in his own time. He's elite status. He's also a horrible drunk with PTSD, and there's very likely he's going to freeze up and panic on the battlefield if if the morale gets too low, because you also have a morale system that's currently optional. You can turn it on and off, but it's like, okay, do I really want to hire this guy? I mean, sure, he's great and he's pretty cheap, all things considered, but the psychiatric bills are gonna be a bitch.
There was a mechanic in MechWarrior 1 where sometimes you would hire a pilot and it almost seemed too good to be true. I think it was like their skills were too high and their cost was too low. And so you're like, what is this guy's deal? But he looks skilled, so I'll hire him. And then whatever mech you put him in, you give him orders and stuff, and you start and you look and he's like running off into the horizon. You go back into the tactical, you're like, no, move over here. And he's ignoring you and he's stealing your mech. He's just fleeing off the battlefield. And I always remember that, and I thought, maybe one day there could be something like that. Who knows? But it was,
and then an optional mission pops up somewhere. It's like, we tracked down the guy who stole your mech. You want to go get him?
Yeah.
The mission doesn't pay anything, but it increases your own reputation because, nobody steals from us.
Yeah, and your morale goes way up.
Yeah, that'd be great, That's always something that's kind of interesting. The Harebrained Schemes BattleTech game did this a bit, where you had like events while traveling between your members of your crew and stuff like that. But having that kind of reactivity in these kinds of games is always great. Like I always imagined playing like a MechWarrior game where you're in some kind of planet, there's a civil war happening, you're on whichever side. You do a mission, you blow up a hospital or two. It's all fun, and then all of a sudden there's this optional mission that pops up that you can take before continue with the rest of the campaign. It's like, yeah, that hospital you blew up, well, now the local refugee population is moving over to this way. We would like you. Can you help escort these guys? You don't have to. It's not going to pay you anything, but might make you feel less bad about blowing up a hospital.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. Have like non-monetary, but like social consequences to something you decided to do in a
or pull a three kings and have like, yeah, this mission you're doing on right now, that's all great. That's great. You're getting paid for that. You want to go on a bank heist? It's like the city's all bombed out and nobody's guarding the central bank.
Right. Now's the time.
Now's the perfect time, yeah. Or like there's an ammo dump here that's been left over from whichever faction just got blown up. You see if you can get there before the main army gets to it and confiscates it for the actual real cause that you're supposed to be fighting for. Because that reminds me of like I was playing in MechWarrior 2 Mercenaries. You're capturing a Kodiak from Ghost Bear for the Draconis Combine, except you have the option of stealing it. You're just you just kill your escort from the Draconis Combine and then just get to the dropship and get the hell out. And it's like, okay, we cannot officially announce that you have stolen this, as it would be great dishonor for us, but nevertheless, fuck you. You get to keep it, but we are going to make you pay for this. We're keeping our money. And meanwhile, I don't care. I got a freaking Kodiak. I'm good.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Currently, there's no way of recovering enemy mechs off the battlefield, as I recall.
There is, but it's right now very random.
Mhm.
So if a mech is taken down lightly, you have like a 20% chance of maybe seeing it. If it's suffered more damage, there's like a 5%. Um, as I sort of mentioned a little earlier, I have a slight revision coming to the salvage system, and part of that revision is to make it much more common to see mech chassis so that you can actually salvage mechs right off the battlefield.
Nice.
They won't be cheap necessarily, but if you see something you really like, it might
There
be
you
worth
go. Or if you see something you really need because you just got your
Yeah,
ass handed to you.
that can happen too. Yeah.
And it happens a lot. I've had to restart because I have a little bit of a difficulty judging necessarily which missions are going to be particularly dangerous. I typically end up biting off way more than I could chew and have to restart the campaign a couple of times just to yell to get going a bit. But I'm getting used to it. I'm sticking around the core right now just to get some practice in and getting used to the mechanics. Like for instance, the call shot mechanic that you've added for this game, which I don't think is in any of the other inspirations. This is Brad. This is a Gaming J exclusive right here.
Yeah, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that's a was a somewhat later edition. It only came out a couple of months back, but it was something that I had sort of wrestled with in the game for a long time because the game, again, inspired by Crescent's Revenge, has some Mech Commander mixed in there as well. But largely in those games, like when you tell your units to attack, you can kind of target who you want them to fire at. Then you kind of just sit back and let them do their thing. And I had always felt like I wish there was a little more to it. I wish you could put your thumb on the scale and like do something as opposed to just watching them fight.
Mhm.
And this is where the idea of the called shot came from. I mean, it was inspired by games like Fallout with their VAT system, and even FTL, which MetalMercs generally has some inspiration from as well. But basically, when your pilots have sort of earned enough focus, which generates during battle, and especially if they're firing a lot in battle, then you as the commander get to do a called shot where you target the head, the core, the legs, the weapons, the ammo, a particular weapon, whatever you want to shoot at, and you get all these special bonuses like a core shot. Most weapons, a core shot will do double damage if it goes internal, but like different weapons have different modifiers. So like rockets, a core shot will do double damage to armor.
Yeah.
And so there's an interaction with different weapons and different locations, and gives you a lot more autonomy as the commander to make kind of critical choices.
Yeah. Like the hex, the equivalent of a PPC in your game, basically will allow you to cause cause the enemies to go haywire because from the electrical blast and stun them so they're unable to fire most of their weapons except for the auto cans and such. So all the electronics go haywire, and you can shoot them in the legs to slow them down. You can also do a full alpha strike, although that has
Yep.
less chance of hitting. So there's a lot of options in terms of like what you want to do, and of course you can just hit automatic and have everybody just decide to fire off as they see fit. Depending on whether you're in the middle of a big fur ball and just okay, I'm just gonna stand back and let them do their thing for a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So as you say, yeah, if you just, there's a lot going on, you can let them do their own thing. I always like reserving a handful of called shots in a few units so that if an enemy tries to flee, or if there's like if there's an enemy really close to death or something, I have the option to make that final shot. But yeah, I mean, when you have these big battles sometimes, because some missions you can take all 12 mechs and you might be facing down like huge swarms of enemies.
Yeah.
In those bigger ones, sometimes it's easier to let your guys just sort of, use their own called shots, and they will take advantage as they can.
Yeah, like those frontline battlefield missions where you're like joining the actual army in the middle of a battle, and there's like dozens of mechs on either side.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right now, there's mostly all the enemies are mechs of different kinds. When you're creating like this whole roster of mechs, what are you looking for in terms of ways of differentiating them and making a mech more than just a chassis? You're just sticking whatever you want into it. Like, are there what is the difference, let's say, between like let's go like take a look here at the wiki here, because yes, there is of course already a wiki.
Yeah.
So like just looking at Union mechs, you have like a Raptor, which is smaller mech, 0.75 versus Liberator
Mhm.
ELBR-9D, which is this huge ass thing with holy shit, that's got a lot. That's a wow, that's got a lot of missiles. And making like one of those smaller mechs, how do you make these different mechs from different factions and different classes play differently when it is such a top-down view of things?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's something I spent a lot of time kind of developing when the game shifted from BattleMercs to MetalMercs. Um, so there's a couple of elements to it. First is that every faction has some unique weapons, or at least preferred weapons. So, for instance, like the Omnisphere Imperium, they're the only faction that has blasters, which are like lasers that can charge up multiple shots. The Orion Corporate is the only faction that has prismatic lasers, which are lasers that can reflect and actually hit multiple targets with one shot.
Mm.
Um, and then like the Helios Sovereignty, they favor long range, so they tend to have a lot of missiles and MAC guns, which are kind of like the Gauss rifles of the.
Yeah, magnetic accelerator cannons.
Yes, exactly.
There you go. I
Um,
know my acronyms.
yeah, it's like you've played these games or something before. Um, but yeah, so I think it starts with um, you know figuring out like what is the feel of this faction, sovereignty that kind of hang back for longer ranges, union that kind of get in the mix, they're like the standard well-equipped military, protectorate are like the big beefy guys that are trying to get up close and punch you and hit you with like ultra cannons and stuff. So having some differentiation in sort of tech and like mentality of the factions can help guide the overall design of the mechs.
Yeah.
So like a protectorate mech will just generally feel different than like an Omnisphere Imperium mech. Um, but then once you get down to like the individual mechs, when I was sort of inventing the individual mechs, I think there was a little bit of like trying to figure out like what is this mech's role on the battlefield? Like within the Union, where they're like pretty militaristic stuff. Like what is their scout and what is it trying to do? What is the bombardier? What is that one trying to do? What is the liberator trying to do? And so by trying to figure out like what the mechs are aimed at doing, you can sort of populate them with sort of weapons and things like how much armor do they have and speed.
Yeah.
And then truthfully, some of it was just like I think a mech would look cool if it had like tons of missiles and it was really heavy and it had jump jets. And so that's where like the Monarch came from for the sovereignty. It's like the super heavy Archer if it also had jump jets. Um,
Nice.
so yeah, it's from a variety of angles, I think. And then the mechs just start to emerge and have their personalities.
Yeah. Are you planning on having other vehicles and stuff like that on the map, like, tanks and things like that, helicopters?
Yeah. So right now there are some vehicles, but they're very rare. They appear in the escort missions and the
Yeah.
lighter escorts. You might have to escort some APCs and stuff.
I do like the way you did that, where you can actually have them, okay, move to the next checkpoint, stay there. Move to the
Yeah,
next checkpoint, stay there. I like that. You don't have to, chase after them as they go off on their own while you have, death coming down from all directions when they should be staying put behind you. Thank you for that.
you're welcome. And that actually came about from a lot of playtesting where we didn't have that, and we were just even I find the escort missions a lot, and like when they just took off, it was like, oh God, wait up. And it was like, okay, something has to change here.
Uh,
But I mean, that's the iterative process of
yeah.
building this thing. So yes, there are going to be vehicles. Right now, the missions all focus on mechs and stuff. But there will be things like tanks. There will be things like, a minor spoiler is there will one day be a mechanism where you could call down an aerospace fighter strike and stuff if you want. So it's like
Nice.
there will be some elements of those coming. Um,
Please be
and
orbital strikes. Please be orbital strikes. Please be orbital strikes.
uh, I will also say too that there are areas outside of the core that I wouldn't say rely on, but are more likely to try and attack you with vehicles than necessarily in the core. So one
Mhm.
other element of once the expedition happens, which is the next major game mode and stuff, and there's like new factions and things to discover outside of the core. Especially there, you may start to see vehicles and used in ways you hadn't seen in the core.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense, especially if you have like you have your main factions and you have factions outside of that. It makes sense that they use different technology and not just all mechs. Because
Yep,
yeah, okay, it makes sense kind of like the clients have mechs of their own, but you
yep,
think by the time they get back, they would be much more different than what they have, currently. Because basically it was just like, okay, they're slightly more advanced, but they're still just mechs, as opposed to doing some kind of weird shit that is completely, different from what the Inner Sphere was up to.
mm-hmm,
Yeah.
yeah, totally.
Yeah. I mean, beyond that, you also, have right now the demo and Patreon build are basically, just the career mode with, you choose your factions, you choose the mercs and mercs you start with, and then you just, go around getting contracts, building up in some cash so you could pay off your debts if you're into that kind of thing, or just, play on the casual, unlimited timer mode and just keep blowing things up. In terms of like the actual story campaign that the adventure mode is also part of the ongoing development, what kind of concepts in terms of missions and stuff like that do you have in mind for that? Because obviously, would you have something that's like one of the little mini campaigns you have for the different contracts, but like a massive kind of branching thing, like something like Wing Commander or something like that, or something a bit more linear?
Yeah, so you're thinking like for the adventure mode specifically.
Mhm.
Yeah, so the adventure mode is one of the upcoming modes of the game that will probably have an appearance before the final version comes out, so you'll get to like try it out ahead of the full release of the game.
Mhm.
Um, but this is a mode where what I'm trying to do is set it up in such a way that like people can make their own adventures. So I'm going to make some adventures,
Mhm.
uh, but it's basically an add-on to the game where there will be a very simple scripting language you could use if you want to like set up your own little
Okay.
based campaigns.
Interesting.
So the initial campaign that I'll likely release will be a little linear, and it will like tell the story of like this, one sort of mech pilot and like the journey he goes on as he fights, like pirates and like invaders, and in this little corner of this planet where it takes place on. Um, and the model that I'm kind of using for what the adventure mode will generally be like is really going back again to the Crescent Hawk's Revenge, where that was a very linear story. And the way it was told was you had your combat missions, and in between missions, you had little dialogue moments where, like, you would see, still images and characters would be talking to you. And sometimes you made choices that would affect the upcoming mission, and you could go
Mhm.
this way or this way. And so the adventure mode, the idea is to make something along those lines that also fans could create their own adventures. So if you wanted to create an adventure where you had it branch in 16 directions and could have different endings, you could make it. I mean, from a coding perspective, it's just having a few more choices and a few more missions as they
Yeah.
go on different directions. So it's like you could totally do that. If you want to tell a more linear story, if you have like a very personal story, you want to talk about, this particular mech pilot or this region of space or whatever you want to tell, then you could tell a more linear story. But the thing is, it's just going to be sort of missions strung together with those like kind of dialogue and choice moments.
Yeah. And you also have like, in between missions, you have the ability to go to, the bar in different places to get your mix refitted and stuff like that, talk to locals. That's also an opportunity for, yeah, as you say, for different choices. If a, fan wants to create a mission where, okay, yeah, you continue your missions, or if you stop by this particular area of the map, of the, in between map of the town and, talk to the locals there, you might get a completely different set of missions that you go on or something like that, or some new options for the current set of missions. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity to, go in different directions with this kind of thing.
Yeah, very much so. And it's sort of like my attempt to bring some of the RPG elements of the original Crescent Hawks Inception stuff back into the game.
Yeah.
And also, you know, give people an opportunity to be able to mod and play with and edit the game too. Because I mean, one thing I always loved growing up when I was younger was tinkering with the games I liked, editing the data files or whatever you could do. And I think making that available for people to do only leads to good things. So I want to create the opportunities in the game for people to be able to mod it and tell different stories that they want to tell.
Yeah. Plus, you already have, like, as you said, the different eras that are coming up. Like right now, there's the baseline, but then from there, you have this great expedition that you've been hinting at that, I'm looking forward to see what that entails. Plus, as you say, different new factions and different concepts outside of the current setting. So you have a lot of places to grow in here, which is the basic greatest advantage to being a game that's relying on its own concepts versus, being, as you said earlier, a fan game where you're completely dependent on, the backstory that was already created for it.
Yeah, and as I say, that's turned out to be one of the most exciting parts I found when I was sort of figuring out, like where is the game going to go? And like, both from a gameplay perspective, but it also has to make sense from a story perspective. Like, why are they leaving the core? And then what are they going to find out there? And what's going to be fun about those battles? And then like, what's going to happen as the expedition goes on? Is it going to be successful? Is it going to fail? Is it going to go in this direction? And will a different era emerge from that?
Yeah. What's happening in the core while they're all away?
Yes, exactly. Right. And as we know from things like BattleTech and Game of Thrones and stuff, eventually all governments end up collapsing due to infighting and other problems. So it can only create more strife, which is great if you are a mercenary, because it means more contracts.
There you go. Well, it means more contracts until everybody's gone, at which point nobody's around to give you contracts. So you want to keep the war going, but you don't want anybody to win it.
That's
or
true.
necessarily lose it. You want everybody to be constantly, at a point where they're just about to win, but not really. Because that's when they're really, really interested in paying out the big bucks.
Yeah. Yeah. Endless strife.
There we go. Oh, that's the best kind of thing, isn't there? So you're currently in development. You have a Patreon that's you're using to fund this. How do you find using crowdfunding methods like Patreon or Kickstarter and stuff like that to fund solo indie game development?
Yeah, I feel like if you can tap into like an enthusiastic fan base, you can get a lot of support in the sense of like it's nice to have people sign up on the Patreon to help the cause, help sort of fund the development. But then another really big advantage of trying to get the crowd involved, so to speak, is that you can get a ton of feedback and help and things like beta testing. Like when MetalMercs was in its early days, it was so bug riddled. And it got to a point where like I wasn't even sure if I wanted to keep going with it because I'm like, it's just gonna be so much work. But it's like I saw there were people eager on the Discord and some people like signed up to legit help do some testing and stuff. And so we were able to push past that. And so like having a community of people, it can motivate you, it can like help figure out bugs and stuff. It can help figure out new ideas. I mean, even in our chat today, you said some interesting things that I'm going to definitely think about. And so yeah, I mean, like our Patreon, like I'm not becoming a millionaire off of it or anything, like no. It's very modest, but it is very much helping. And when I think about the fact that there's, like however many people out there, like throwing a couple bucks my way every month, and that really does help me out. It's a little humbling just to realize I'm just some dude making a mech game and like this many people believe in it, and that's pretty awesome. And even if eventually like the Steam release totally flopped for some reason, this all went away, it's like at least it was kind of cool for that moment and those people really did believe in it. So I mean, there's some Kickstarter stories where people go on Kickstarter and they make millions of dollars and make their amazing game and so on. This is a smaller scale operation.
And there are
Um,
other stories where, people, put everything they've got into a Kickstarter and nothing happens with it. It just like flops completely.
yeah, well, so that's actually one reason I never went the Kickstarter route is I I never wanted to basically promise people things I couldn't deliver.
Mm.
And so, not saying that like I'm gonna take the Patreon money and run and MetalMercs is never gonna get released and thanks suckers. But rather with Patreon, it's sort of like, yeah, people can send you a couple bucks here and there, and it helps sort of keep the gears turning. But you're also not like promising, this is going to be released in this many months and it's going to have all these features and pay me this much and blah, blah, blah. It's a little
Yeah.
more like, they're kind of kicking you a little money to help you along the way. And so Patreon felt like a better fit. And, you know, with every month that goes by, we're getting closer and closer to actually finishing the game. I mean, we have a Steam page now, so it's like we're
Yeah.
on the legit track. So we made it there. It's just Kickstarter felt like a lot of pressure. And again, I didn't want to take anyone's money under a promise I wasn't sure I could fulfill.
Yeah.
So
There's also the issue with a lot of Kickstarters where they, get enough money to keep themselves going, but they promise so many physical extra backer stuff, like, extra, backer, bonuses and stuff like that. And then they realize, oh shit, I didn't realize it was going to be this popular. Now I have all this stuff that I have to deal with too. You see a lot of Kickstarters that end up, not breaking even, having to go with additional backing stuff, or having to go into early access along with Kickstarter because they just keep or need to get a publisher and stuff like that, or just going on Epic for a year because they need the extra money just to get everything to keep the lights on, and it's
yeah.
like. Yeah, Epic, all the Epic Gaming Store also, as we know it in PC, as the 1 year extra paid beta testing before it actually properly releases.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
Kickstarter, as I say, it's very tricky. And I'm
it's
one of those guys where I'm like, if you ask me how much do you think it would cost to do this in the game or this in the game or this? I'm like, I have no idea. I truly don't. I
yeah.
don't even know how people estimate that stuff. And so it's better to work on a tiny budget, my own pace, and do the best I can by the people supporting me, and we'll figure the rest out as we go rather than
Yeah.
committing.
It's one of those things where these kinds of like, like Kickstarters and Indiegogo and stuff like that. It helps if you already have a base product already ready to go in a way. Like, okay, you've got the basic game. We just need to pay for polish and play testing and stuff like that to make sure everything works. Or we have a book, it's all written out, mostly, or mostly written out, just needs editing and copy reading and actual printing. That's what you're paying for.
Mhm.
Because it's one of those things like, yeah, you could probably at this point probably be able to get to a Kickstarter because you have a demo that people can play in order
Right.
to see whether or not it's actually worth continuing to back and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And then of course you have the people I want to put my special super awesome OC into your game if you have for this much money, and it's like, okay, that doesn't fit, but they give me the money, so you
Right.
feel that pressure to perform in that regard. Versus Patreon, where you don't have that kind of extra pressure in that regard.
Hmm.
Uh, Plus, as you say, it gives you that massive player base. Well, hopefully massive player base that can actually do the play testing that you need for this kind of thing. And we're going it at an iterative basis, so you can see like okay, this version had this many bugs. My players really went through it, and they're oftentimes, somebody who just does a Kickstarter, they might just, throw in a couple of bucks. Okay, we've got a couple of, updates, not paying it too much attention. Someone who's giving money every month, they're going to be more incentivized to pay more attention. So if you need some help for playtesting, chances are there are more people who are going to be actually playing the current build and give you a, insight into what's going on with it.
Yeah, for sure. It's more tuned in than, as you say, contributing to Kickstarter. Then you kind of walk away and forget about it. Like, tell me when it's finished. Whereas on Patreon, it's more like, people are checking in and having those engaged fans. I mean, not just for bugs, but even like, coming up with inventive ideas and stuff and suggestions.
Mhm.
Having that community is, I've realized, incredibly valuable.
Yeah. And speaking of community, you also set up a Discord channel, Discord server for MetalMercs and for all their stuff. I haven't done that yet for my own stuff. Don't think I'm quite that big, and I'm mostly in other people's servers, hawking my stuff. But you are basically running that whole thing yourself. You're not, are you having any extra moderators or anything like that, or is that
There,
also kind of a solo enterprise?
there are a couple of moderators. So I am probably what you would consider Discord illiterate. I knew nothing about Discord really. I'd been on it like once or twice. Like a friend set up a thing so we could play online once. But before I set it up we set up initially for MetalMercs. I'd never done it. Um, so I sort of muddled my way through, and then a few people stepped forward early on and like offered to help. And so there's a couple of people who help on it. Um, I think I guess I don't do too much like organizing of stuff on the Discord. Like it's largely set for the time being at least. But like I'm active there, like talking in like the general channel, and I post announcements there as well. So I mean MetalMercs is the kind of thing where like even if you don't want to be a Patreon, first of all, you can go over to our Patreon and you can follow us for free, and there's lots of free posts. And that's just where I post like news updates and stuff.
Mm.
So a good place to get news. You can also hop on the Discord, and there you not only get the announcements, you can also talk to us there too. And there's a lot of people who will talk to you about MetalMercs, myself included. And having a Discord has been that main way I think that I actually communicate with fans, as I've been telling you about,
Yeah.
where we have an area where people can report bugs, but also an area where people can throw up suggestions. And some features that are currently in the game came from suggestions people had. So
Yeah. I wonder how much there's definitely an advantage to being that involved with the community of the game that you're making. I wonder if there's also, it's very much a two-edged sword depending on, I think, on the size of the community also. Because you hear a lot of horror stories of community managers and stuff like that dealing with, unruly fans and stuff like that. Or, the opposite, fans having to deal with unruly community managers who, get a stick up their ass. It's like, yeah, I mean, I guess it also depends on the kind of game you're making, because there's sometimes certain games where you want to keep things closer to your chest versus, keeping people constantly updated with, strings of information about, the newest developments and stuff like that, and having that interactivity versus something that's a bit more, I guess, self-designed art piece or something like that, which is very much very personal, where you don't necessarily want all that much outside influence diluting things for you.
yeah, I mean that certainly is very true. I mean, sort of the process that I'm going through here is not necessarily going to fit for everyone out there who's trying to make a game. I guess another thing too is that kind of I learned early on that you don't have to take everyone's suggestions. They're just suggestions, and
Just
I think
mine.
yeah, if you did accept every suggestion, things also could quickly go off the rails.
Mm.
So um, it's it's helpful to like hear from people because sometimes they'll pick up on things that I had never thought of, or see problems or potential where I'm not seeing it. But I think, at the end of the day, if you're the one making a game, you also do have to kind of think it is the game I'm making. If something doesn't fit, I'm not going to add it. So
Yeah.
you have to be aware of that too. But yeah, we're also at a sweet spot where I guess, as you say, there is always potential to get like really unruly or demanding fans and stuff. And like honestly, right now in the Discord, we don't have anyone like that. We don't have anyone who's like rude or pushy or anything like that. Everyone is like so
Well, that's
uh,
good.
enthusiastic and just
Yeah.
kind. So I think that's helping.
Yeah. I
But
think maybe
if
it
you're too
also,
big,
yeah.
you may need to moderate more.
Yeah. Well, I think also what helps is that you're making a game that hasn't been around for a very long time. Like we're seeing a lot of turn-based mech games, like
Hmm.
Crescent Tactics, Zeta Tactics, the obviously Airburst Screens Battletech, and a couple other things that have popped up over the years in recent times. But in terms of real-time tactics game, like the old Crescent Revenge, this kind of style of mech game is harder to find these days. So you're obviously going to find a more enthusiastic, fan base for this who have been not necessarily denied, but starved of what they actually want for a very long time.
Yeah, and people have asked over the years, like, like maybe you'll do a turn-based follow-up or add a turn-based mode or something. And, never say never, but I do also think, especially even when this game was back as MetalMercs before it became MetalMercs, it felt that, to me anyway, the niche it served was that real time kind of Mech Commander, Crescent Hawk's Revenge area, and especially when it was BattleTech themed, I kind of felt if I make it turn based, I'm just totally stepping on the toes of Harebrained Studios. At least this, yeah, it's a fan game, and if it gets too popular, they'll shut me down. But at least it's doing something they're not doing, so it's like not cannibalizing anything that they're after.
Yeah.
And then now that it's become MetalMercs, it's like it just feels like this is just how MetalMercs plays. And that's not to say there could never be a sequel or a spin-off or something that could be turn-based in the MetalMercs universe. But this game, at least, I think one of its core elements is that it's like real time with pause, sort of in the FTL style of things. It's like things can get super chaotic, but you can always hit that pause button, catch your breath, and then figure out some detailed moves, and then unpause and watch it all collapse in front of you.
Yeah, that is something I enjoy for, games like this. There's, a couple of, real-time tactics games. They're actually kind of like spiritual successors to Jagged Alliance and some of the Brigade games that Hyperion did. There's Brigade, there's 762 millimeter hard. What was the, yeah, goddamn, I should probably try to remember that. Boot up Steam so I can look at those. But basically, those ones operate also on real time with pause, where each move is calculated down to the second. So, like, okay, it takes this much time to raise a weapon, aim, fire, reload, and all that stuff. So you have to, hit pause, and then you can have them like cycle on through a series of orders that you can give to your controlled characters. And you can see the amount of time it's going to take them to do each and every one of those things. And that's always another way of doing it. Like, I've seen other games try to do the real time, like not real time with pause, but you remember Frozen Synapse, that game that, where everything is paused, you give out the orders, then you press play and everything goes off in real time. There's another mech game called Phantom Brigade that tried to do something similar, and I hated that game so bad. I just like, it's just the way that other people swear by this game, but I just could not enjoy the way that it was all set up to work. It just felt clunky to me, just trying to get it to work like that. That is a game that I think would have benefited, for me at least, either being turn-based or real-time, not this kind of in-between thing. There also is some story issues with that one I didn't enjoy, but I do like the fact that you actually stuck to your guns and went for something that wasn't just another turn-based game, because at that point, I probably would have skipped it because there's so many of them out there at this point.
Yeah. And, having so much influence from BattleTech in its DNA, it's sort of another way it tries to break the mold and differentiate and like add something different, right? Like, why would you play this over Harebrained Studios BattleTech, which is, a super amazing turn-based tactical experience, right? If I just tried to copy Harebrained Studios and just slather on, a coat of paint and call it something different, I would do a much poorer job because they did such a great job on that. So it's like, I'm not trying to copy that. I'm trying to capture the style of a game that, like, there's only games that have been made, but they're very old. Like, no one's really trying to make this kind of mech game. So it seemed like something. I mean, I just made the game I wish existed.
That's usually how it works. You really want, first things first, you want to make a game that you would like to play. And then hopefully other people will also be joining you in that, because, you're not just making this game for yourself, you're also making it for an, prospective audience. So yeah, but ultimately you do need to make something that you want to play because you're the one who's going to be playing it the most, making it in the process.
Yep. A lot.
Yeah. I mean, having been a former playtester for Activision for a while, good while, yeah, you end up playing the same thing over and over and over and over again until you can figure it, until it works, or until the devs run out of money and they just have to put it out regardless of whether state it's in.
Right.
Yeah. Here it is. Those are the games I was talking about earlier. That was Brigade E5, New Jagged Union, 762 High Caliber, and Marauder Man of Prey. Those are the games I was talking about. janky as hell, but the systems are really interesting. It's like you're saying, we're playing those 1001 games. Sometimes you find a game that's like, okay, I can see where they were going with this. They had some great ideas. It may not have worked as well as they would have hoped, but you know what? They had some good ideas, and I think I can probably use that for something.
Yep.
So yeah. So yeah, as you said, it's probably the MetalMercs is currently in development. It's probably going to be releasing next year at some point. For everybody who's interested, you have the Patreon, you have the Discord, you have. Is there any other places that people can reach you?
Yeah. Question. So yeah, the Patreon, patreon.com/MetalMercs. You don't have to sign up to pay if you want to. It's a really good place to just get like news updates and stuff. Those are all public. There's just the special perks that are for the paid members there. If you look for MetalMercs on Steam and try the demo, on the demo's startup page and a few other spots, you'll see the Discord link. I would give you the Discord link, but it's something god awful. It's like discord.gg/ and then a bunch of hash characters, because Discord seems to pause the ability to get a nice clean name. Anyway, that's how you find us on Discord. And then also, I guess I said Steam. And then the last place you could find me if you're, want to check me out is you can find me on YouTube. And I think my YouTube these days, let me just double check. youtube.com/GamingJ1000 and my general YouTube channel. And so I do occasionally do live streams with MetalMercs there, put out a MetalMercs video, but that's also where I just generally do my 1001 quest, and I play Steam games or other retro games. So just general Let's Plays usually.
All right, cool. All the links for that will be in the description of the video for people who want to check that out. Mr. J, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for MetalMercs. I'm hoping it becomes a great success for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us, and trying not to let you down.
No, we certainly hope not. For everybody else, I have been Zero Sun. This has been Gaming J. We're rejecting. Bye-bye.
All primary objectives complete. Mission successful.